Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of This, That, and the Other. I'm your host, Magic. This is season 5, and we are on episode 2. Actually, to be honest, it's episode 2.0, I guess, of episode 2. We had a situation on the previous show where somehow or another the media didn't get uploaded to the server. So it wasn't, well, in essence, it wasn't recorded. So we're going to try again. Unfortunately, our guest, I believe it was Aaron, was on with us. And the text part of that, he's not here tonight. Maybe he'll pop in. Who knows? And we'll go ahead and get him on and discuss some of the things we did in that show. But nonetheless, here's some of the things have been not necessarily a hot topic, but some new stuff that has come up and stuff that I've gotten in the questions through site mail. So we'll be discussing quite a few of these. We'll talk about the total ratings, the high school stats that you see on players' profiles, and just how valuable those are or aren't when it comes to recruiting. Also, the auto renewal process and the promised start for sophomores. The infamous loophole has finally been closed by the What If Sports staff. So that's a good thing to see. And I know there's quite a few people out there that are really happy to see that. Won't mention any names, but it happens. We've got some Sim AI questions that came in regarding recruiting. So we'll talk about how the Sim AI teams can keep recruiting as long as the recruit is interested in them. And as long as they haven't already been totally wiped off, then they'll keep recruiting. If for some reason the school that has knocked them all off fills all their scholarship, the Sims will pop back. So a lot of people weren't aware of that. So those are some things we're going to talk about. But first and foremost, let me just apologize for my voice. I don't know what's going on with it. I did do a presentation the other day, so where I talked quite a bit. So I have no idea. I've been trying to do all kind of different remedies. May need to get a hold of Shannon, see if he can send me some of that Virginia whiskey. Maybe that'll help us out. Also had some dental work done and kind of sore on the side of my mouth, so you have to forgive me for that as well. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and talk about one of the things that popped up first and foremost in the question box was, and this is because we do have a lot of new players to the game. There have been quite a few promotions done in the past where that has drummed up some interest, and now some of those players are getting into the different nuances of the game to where they're actually able to come up with ideas or questions or concerns that they didn't know existed when they first started playing. So now that they've gotten deeper into the game, they're starting to generate some really good questions and things that are worth sharing and discussing. And one of those is, how valuable is it when you see the recruit player, his profile page? Even before recruiting starts, the information is there if you go to his profile page, and you'll see at the bottom a quarterback, for instance. Let's say the kid has thrown for 3,000 yards in high school, 70% completion percentage, 40 touchdowns, no interceptions. You know, the kid's phenomenal. And then you've got another quarterback who only threw for 200 yards and no touchdowns and 15 interceptions. If you compare those stats, is that an indicator that one is going to be better than the other? And the clear cut, 100% guaranteed, definitive answer is those stats mean absolutely nothing. In no way, shape, or form are they to be considered an indicator of that player's past, current, or future performance. It is simply eyewash that WIS put on those profile pages, decades ago, in order to give a realistic feel to the game, if you will. Even though they don't mean anything, a lot of folks look at them and, just enjoy that, for lack of a better term, that eye wash, as I call it, that pops up. And unfortunately, a lot of the guys and gals who play the game who are coming into it have made the mistake of assuming that was indicative of a player's ability when in fact it wasn't, and it's cost them in recruiting. They've actually recruited a piss poor player who had some glorified stats on his recruit profile page that don't mean anything. So yeah, total ratings, the high school stats, and $2 get you a cup of coffee, as I put it. But the total ratings is misleading as well. Now, while it's not to be dismissed entirely as the high school stats portion of a profile page, the recruits or the players' ratings are a cumulative score of his values in the various categories: his athleticism, speed, tackling, um, technique, game instinct. All of those individual items totaled up give you that total ratings. And I think we've talked about this years ago, and it's worth bringing up again. Those total ratings, while they may show that a player has more uh, points in overall categories, it doesn't necessarily mean he's better than another player comparatively. For instance, we'll stay with the quarterbacks. Two quarterbacks. One has a 700 rating, total rating, and the other one has a 590 total rating. So immediately right off top, you're going to assume that the 700 total rating quarterback is better than the 500 rating quarterback. And that's not necessarily the case, because the quarterback with a 700 rating could have his total ratings be bolstered by the fact that he's got high value in categories that don't translate to a good quarterback. And what I mean by that is, for instance, let's say he has a 100, which is the max rating you can get in tackling. Do you, as a coach, care if your quarterback has a high tackling rating? The only way I'd care about that is if he's throwing a lot of interceptions, and I want him to go get the guy. But let's be realistic. We don't care if a quarterback has a high tackling rating. So why would we look at those numbers in total ratings that are bolstered or higher because of the 100 that he has in tackles, or 100 in the durability? Durability is a non-factor anymore and hasn't been for years, because players simply don't get hurt in the course of the season like they did years gone by, where you had to be diligent in recruiting backups because players would get hurt and they'd be out for a game, for a half, for the year. So those issues occurred. They don't happen anymore. So durability is a non-factor. So let's say he had 100 in durability and 100 in tackling. There's the 2 point or the 200 points that make up the 500 to 700 difference. Now, granted, that would mean that the other player would have to have zeros in both of those categories. And the reality is, of course, they probably wouldn't. So it balances out throughout some of the other categories that you have. Hands, for instance, it really doesn't matter for a quarterback. You want to look for a quarterback that's got high athleticism, good strength, technique, good game instinct. This is the guy that's going to lead your team. This is the guy you want back there making those decisions on when to and when not to throw the football. So, that 500 guy could have very high numbers in those critical core rating categories, whereas the guy that has the overall higher total rating number doesn't necessarily have the numbers where they need to be for him to be a quarterback. So that's one of the things that players have asked me about, or coaches have asked me about, how much weight to put in those total numbers, and don't. It's an indicator if everything else is tied. And I don't know how else to say that. Let's get to the auto renewal and promise sophomore start loophole. For those of you that don't know what this is actually referring to, it is a situation that up until the first had existed in What If Sports GD for over 10 years, I think, probably longer than that. And what it amounted to is a lot of people refer to it as the sophomore start promise, and it's actually an issue with the renewal process of your team. For instance, at midnight Eastern time, on the last day of the last day of the season, in other words, the national championship game has just finished earlier that day. The clock has now moved forward. It's 11:59 p.m. on the East Coast, 2 minutes later, it's, a minute into the new season. And when that happens, if you did not auto renew your team, what will occur is you will be removed from that team. Now, that team will not be immediately available as viewable in the available jobs, because there is about a 2.5 hour buffer or 2 hour buffer unit, buffer time frame that's built in to allow those coaches that didn't auto renew to go ahead and renew their team without having to go through the reapplication process and be requalified for that. So the way that works is, if you don't auto renew your team, midnight rolls around, you're no longer part of the team, you can go back onto your coach's page and you can apply for jobs and see that. And there'll be a notice up saying, hey, it looks like you forgot to renew this team. Fortunately, no other coaches have applied, blah, blah, blah. Click here to reclaim your team instantaneously. And you do, and you get your team back. Now, what happens if you wait too long is that team will then become available or visible to other coaches to apply for. And that same notice will pop up, and you can still do the same thing at that point. You can do the same thing up until the last day of the hiring period for job changes, is what it's called. And if nobody else has applied for it, the minute you click, you want to go back to it, you get the team. Now, if someone has applied for that job because it is available, that means that even though if you click the button that says, I want to go back to that team, you now are re-entered into the pool of consideration for that team, because it's not just about you anymore. There's another player out there. And so 2, 3, or 4 of you will then be weighed against that coaching opening to see who's qualified to get that job, or who's the one that they're going to choose. Now, there's a caveat to that, and a lot of people may not be aware of it, is that just because a coach has applied for that team, if that coach later decides that he does not want to apply for that team and he withdraws his application, and there's no other coaches out there that have applied for that, then the coach that was there can once again get his team without having to go through the rehiring process and the evaluation process, because it basically is just like there's nobody there that applied for it. Even though that one time there was, that coach has withdrawn his application. So the job is essentially not had any interest. So the returning coach, it still has the option to click the team, get the team right then and there, and move forward. So having said that, the issue comes in when we talk about the promises. And what happens is, as a coach during recruiting the previous year, you made a promise to your freshman start, or a freshman playing time, or sophomore start. Those are basically the 3 promises that you can make. 2 of those don't mean the hell of beans when it comes to this auto renewal process, because by the time the auto renewal process issue shows up, that season has already been played. So your freshman promises and your playing time promises will have had to have been honored during that year already. So the concern is the sophomore aspect. If you offer a sophomore start during recruiting, and then you play that season, that recruit doesn't care if he plays or not, because he's only concerned about that sophomore promise. He knows he's getting a start the next year. So now the season ends. It's after midnight. The season rolls over. As far as what if sports is concerned, at that point, they're still freshmen. And I misspoke. Not the season rolls over, but the job change period has started. When the season rolls over, which is about 3 days later, that's when those freshmen now become sophomores. But what has happened is, even before you get to that period, if you do not auto renew your team, and now you go back and you click the button, say, I want that team back, and there's nobody else there, and you automatically get it back, those promises for those sophomores have disappeared. They're gone. So the sophomore, even though you're the returning coach, is not going to hold you accountable for that sophomore promise that you made. So what some coaches have done, and this is me included, is you make a sophomore promise and then you don't auto renew, and in the subsequent season, you don't have to honor that promise. Now, I say that because I encourage everybody to do that. Everybody that I talk to about it, I said, do it. Because if there are coaches out there who are doing it, then it puts you on an even keel with them when it comes to that aspect of recruiting. If you're not going to have to honor the promise, and other coaches are not honoring the promise, and there's no penalty for it, do it. So the issue then came, is that cheating or not? That's a whole different ball of wax. And there's an idiot who thinks that, everybody on Yahoo or on What If Sports is a cheater because they choose to do things that he may or may not agree with. That's his problem. He'll get over it. Freaking loser. But anyway, I'm not here to bash him. I'm just here to tell the truth. And the matter is that it has been fixed. The What If Sports team has gone in and fixed that. So now when you go back to your team after failing to auto renew, those recruits who were freshmen that are now sophomores will hold your feet to the fire to ensure that they get their sophomore start as you promised them, even though you left the team and came back. The one issue with that is WIS said they were going to do it without warning. And that's what happened. On the first, boom, they initiated the patch. It's now part of the program. So all these coaches who were in the midst of recruiting will have sophomore promises on players that they will have to keep next season. In retrospect, everybody blew up and said, oh, that's fair. That for cheating, that's what they should have to be punished. But it's not a punishment if you're managing the team right to begin with. And what I mean by that is, if you promise a sophomore start to a player, whose business is it if you start him or not? That's between you and the player. But as a coach, you want to start him, regardless of your promise. You want to get your guys playing time. So, in all honesty, any sophomores that I have ever promised playing time to, that I didn't redshirt and promised not playing time, but sophomore starts to, and didn't redshirt, got playing time anyway. They got more than enough playing time to qualify for a freshman start, but that's not how the program works. He's only cared about his sophomore start that he was promised. And that speaks to the fact that even if you promise a sophomore start and you get a player enough playing time to where he is a every game freshman starter, and you don't start him as a sophomore, he's going to bitch. Even though he started his entire first season. That's not the promise. The promise was you're going to start him his sophomore year. So now you've got to do that. And now that this loophole has been fixed, the penalty is that if you don't do that, his work ethic will drop. And of course, now we understand that work ethic drop affects everything. He's going to quit growing in the manner that he would had he had work ethic unaffected. So the whole ball of wax boils down to the fact that some people call it cheating. The bottom line is it's not. And it never was, because coaches were playing these guys anyway. So there was no perceived advantage of offering a sophomore start and then not renewing and then not having to keep the promise, when the reality was, I'd probably say 99.9% of the time, those players were starting anyway. So at that point, that's when I became vocal and encouraged people to at least get on an even playing field with the coaches that were doing that, because that allowed them to use the same tactic and keep the field level for their benefit that some of the other coaches were doing. And again, the loophole's been fixed, so now it's a no big deal. It's not even worth discussing anymore. There have been individuals who have accused coaches that have dozens of national championships of cheating in order to do that all their national championships are tainted somehow. And I say that's a bunch of bullshit, because how is promising a sophomore start correlating directly to a guy winning or a gal winning dozens and dozens of national championships? If all somebody had to do was promise a sophomore start and then not honor it to win a national championship, there'd be a whole lot more coaches out there with dozens of national championships than the select few. That's not why they won national championships, you dumbass. They won national championships because they're good. They know things. They didn't win because they cheated. They win regardless because they know how to work the X's and O's in a binary system that is this online platform that we call What is Sports Gridiron Dynasty Football. Bottom line, pure and simple. Now, I say that because I know that goober is going to get on the thread and he's going to bitch, gripe, piss, and moan about how cheating has tainted everybody's victories. So what? Who cares? Nobody gives a rat's butt what you think anyway. You know, that person reminds me a lot of these celebrities who said, oh, you know, if so and so wins the election, I'm leaving the country. And they never do. He wants somebody to care about his feelings without actually worrying about whether he's right or not. So, again, there's people out there, and it takes all kind, and you got to love it because it brings laughter to all of us when we see some of the ridiculous stuff that they post. I will now get off my soapbox on that. Now let's look at this. Semi-I teams haven't, or semi-I teams have an art subject. What did I write? Semi-I teams aren't subject. That did not make a whole lot of sense, did it? Semi-I teams. Let's see if that's better. That's just weird. And you would think that I would be smart enough to proofread this, which I did. But anyway, semi-I teams aren't subject to distance costs. And they keep recruiting as long as a recruit is interested in them. All right, let's break this down first and foremost. The distance cost. I don't know what the actual value is. That's some of the close hold secret of the staffers. But it is a fact based on what we've been told over these many years that a sim team has an endless budget, but at the same time, there's a realistic management of that in the fact that they don't just have $1 million budget to throw on a recruit. If they did, they would land all the recruits they want, and that's just not how it works. When we say that they have an unlimited budget, it's basically similar in line with what everybody else has, but they are still able to dish it out a little bit at a time. And who knows what their overage allowance is? It's there. So the distance cost, knowing that they aren't subjected to that like we are as human coaches, is important because remember, a lot of your scouting budget accounts for those recruits that are within your 360-mile radius. You know, that keeping them close allows you to send numerous visits and scouts, etc. Whereas if the recruit is 2,000 miles away, that's really going to shoot through your recruiting budget because it costs more the further away you are for your home visits, your campus visits, your scouting, all of that. It costs a lot more. Now, as an individual human coach, there's only so much of that long distance recruiting I can do before I run out of money. With SIM-AIs, they don't necessarily target a bunch of recruits within their 360s. They blanket the whole United States, and they do so before anybody else recruiting is available for them. So that's why when recruiting comes on, you'll see a lot of sim schools on recruits or recruit that has favors. Okay, I have a favorite, and my favorite is Memphis, and I like UCLA, and I like California. Boom, those are the three schools because they may have dropped AC scouts on this guy or whatever it is that they do in their recruiting effort. Now, that means that you can also recruit that player, but you have to be cognizant of the fact that if you're a D1 AA school and you see the recruit and he's got D1A schools on him, you're going to have to put forth the same amount of effort, not money, but effort, as those schools did in order to get that recruit to start looking at you on a favorable basis. But what's not known is how much more you have to do to ensure that that recruit sees you in a favorable basis as far as the effort goes. That's part of that formula that's hidden from all of us. So each cycle, each cycle, sim AIs are still recruiting. Who knows if it's a phone call, if it's an AC scout, whatever the case may be, they are still recruiting. Um, One thing I did recently is right, yeah, the signing started. I had a scholarship on a recruit, and I was yellow for this recruit along with one other sim AI school. The scholarship offer reply email came back from the recruit saying that he's leaning to my school, but he likes some other places as well. But it's the one where he's definitely leaning to your school. That in of itself is enough to indicate that that recruit about 90% of the time is going to sign with you if no other recruiting activity takes place. So if it's two humans on a recruit and neither human puts in any more effort and nobody else jumps in on this recruit, then if you got that email as one of the coaches, there's a good chance that recruit's going to sign with you. Now, with the sim AI, in this case, I got that email and I said, I'm not doing anything else. I want to see how long it takes to see if I get an email saying I'm no longer his preferred choice. Lo and behold, it was probably a day and a half later. I hadn't recruited the guy, but I get a reply email to my offer that says, Coach, uh, I'm looking at other schools, so I may not be going to your school. That type of email reply. And again, I didn't send him anything. The initial offer that I made of the scholarship, he had already replied to. So without any additional action on my part, a day and a half later, I get an email from him regarding the fact that he is no longer considering me as a favorite for his scholarship acceptance. That proves that sim AIs continue to recruit. And again, it took about a day and a half. I don't know what that lead was. I don't know if I just barely eked out that sim AI or if I was so far ahead that just one more phone call would have tipped him and he would have accepted the scholarship. I have no way of knowing that. But like I said, it does prove the fact that sim AIs keep recruiting. So as long as a sim AI is showing up on a recruit, he is still being wooed by that sim AI school. So if you're in a battle with the sim AI, knock that sucker off as fast as you can. Because once he's off and once there's only humans on him, he will sign with one of those two humans. As long as each of them have a scholarship available for him to accept. Let me caveat that. What that means is to drag out a battle with the sim AI is a losing position on your behalf. You are wasting money. It's going to take X number of effort in order to knock that sim off. To do it today is going to take a lot less effort overall than if you wait 3, 4, 5, 6 days to try to knock this guy off. I don't know if 6 days, 5 days. If you wait till the end of recruiting to knock him off. So, it's been said on the message board, knock these sims off ASAP, and that's why, because they will continue to recruit. So, having said that, the question is how much, how long, all these numbers that we don't know as far as what the sim AIs are putting into these recruits. That's that backroom secret, that formula that we don't know. And we don't know it for a good reason. So to counter the fact of not knowing what it would take, just do it. That's what I recommend. Just get in there. If you want the recruit and he's got sim AIs on him, recruit him and do it hard the first cycle or two. Get those sims out of there because once they drop off, they don't come back on. And the bottom line is, why string it out? There's two issues with stringing it out. The one I just mentioned about how the sims come back. The second one is what other human coaches will do. If they see that you are yellow with the sim AI and it's day 4, day 5 of recruiting, they pretty much know how much effort you have put into that. Very little. Otherwise, he would be green to you or he would be gone because you've signed him. So if he's yellow to you, and to me as a human coach, if I'm desperate and I'm looking for some signing potential and I see a decent player that's got a sim on him and a human on him, I have a good idea about how much it's going to take to get that sim off of that player. Now, given the fact that that sim keeps recruiting, both of these, the human coach and the sim coach or the sim team, could have been putting, a phone call or an AC scout or whatever continuous on him. And it tends to be a little greater than normal the longer you recruit. So I have to factor that possibility in as well when I set my budget for this particular player on a chance to go ahead and sign him. And, it could be something as simple as a D2 player. Let's use D2, for example. You throw 10 campus visits at the guy and he signs with you. Or because they've lengthened the drawn out battle for the recruit that this head coach has. And, it's day 4, day 5. It could take you 12, 15 campus visits to sign this guy. Who knows? But again, the possibility is there to tackle, no pun intended, this recruit and get him on your squad if you've got the money, because that recruit is telling you that the sim AI has not done enough to get my signature, nor has the human coach. So as a human coach, the longer you drag that out, the more you're dangling that raw meat for other coaches to come in and snag. And then we've got guys and gals on the board in the past that have griped about how somebody has taken their recruit at the last minute. Well, no shit, Sherlock. He was available. He was out there. If you wanted him, recruit him. Don't caress his neck and stroke his hair and ask how his day went. Recruit that SOB. Get him on that roster. Otherwise, don't bitch if somebody else does. If somebody comes along and says, hey, I need this recruit, and Junior over here hasn't gotten enough recruiting into him to knock the sim off, I got plenty of cash. Boom, I'm taking him. Great for that coach. I hope it helped his roster. And I hope the coach who was yellow with the sim team learned something. Lord knows I have. Why do you think I'm sharing it? So understand that you need to get these sims off of these recruits ASAP for a variety of reasons. All right, let's see what else we got. I think that's about it. Well, how about that? Pretty short TTATO this week. Let's see. Yeah, we're about 30 minutes in. So no one else has joined. Not a big deal. What we'll do is come back on here in about 3 weeks. And I have reached out to the WIS staff to give us a status report of sorts for any upcoming changes, implementations, updates, whatever they're being called. We had that one little patch, and I don't think it was so much in interest of furthering the GD platform as it was, fixing an issue. And I'm glad to see that that issue has been resolved. And I'm glad to see that we can now move on to something else to gripe about. Anyway, I'm your host, Magic, and I've enjoyed being with you and look forward to seeing you here in a couple of weeks. Y'all have a good one.